Okay, these are the paintings of a Russian artist by the name of Ivan Vladimirov. All of these paintings were made between 1917 to 1919, except one was made in 1922. Okay, this painting here is the destruction of the Tsar's palace by the Bolsheviks. You can see the soldiers are just destroying the paintings, etc. Here is the Bolsheviks burning eagles. That was one of the symbols of the Tsar's regime in Russia, which is, largely Christian, and a painting of the Tsar being destroyed. The Bolsheviks were arresting the Christian generals who had worked for the Tsar. All of these paintings, again, are by Ivan Vladimirov, arresting other Christians who had worked for the Tsar. And then many of them were just executed. Here's the Bolsheviks executing some Christians. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, 1917, 1918, and whatnot, was very much like what happened in France in 1789, 1794. It was to get rid of the Christians. Okay, that was the big thing. Of course, there's more to it than that, but that's the big thing. Okay, here's Bolsheviks interrogating a prisoner. Here is a Bolsheviks executing a Christian prisoner down in the basement of the Cheka building. Here is Bolsheviks looting a Russian store, and they would loot the pharmacies, they would loot all these places. Basically, taking Russia, which was aspiring to become, a significant, sophisticated European country, and turning it into a third world crap hole. Here are the Bolsheviks getting rid of symbols of the Tsarist regime, like the eagle. Okay. The Bolsheviks then looted the banks and took all the people's money out of the banks. They took it out of the vaults. They looted all their safety deposits, took all their valuables out of their safety deposits. And Ivan Vladimirov, at first they thought this was funny. They didn't mind his paintings. Later he was not seen so well. Then they stole the food from the farmers. They called it requisitioning. They would steal the grain, the yield from the poor farmer. So they wanted to starve a lot of people to death, starving the kulaks, starving other people to death by taking their food. That's very common, that a cow, then a moon, then the east starves to death the people of a place. They don't want those people. Okay, here's the Bolsheviks looting the house of a Christian and then burning it down. Christian families evicted from their homes. Now they are homeless. Here is a Christian landowner and a Christian priest, and they are undergoing a trial by the Bolsheviks, and they've been sentenced to death. Here are the Christian priests, and they were forced into slavery. Forced labor is slavery. Of course, the plumbing is not working, so there's no water, and people have to go to the river to get water and carry it back to their homes, the lucky ones that still have homes. Notice how everything is shoved down into poverty, brutality, and fear of force, okay? That's life in Russia. Okay, now here's a lady and some Bolshevik soldiers. He grabbed her by the hand, and she's going to get RAPED'd. Because one of the things women, like in the Western world, have taken for granted for a long time is that their own personal safety. Try walking down the streets in Europe nowadays, where they've got all these foreigners, military-age men from other countries. They don't respect your person. They'll just hit you over the head, drag you into a building, and RAPE the women, okay, including the young females, the teenage females, okay. This is happening all over. There's gangs of men now in Europe, foreigners that have invaded these countries, and they now do this routinely to the European women. Don't take my word for it, just look it up. This is well known. There's been tons and tons of protests and outcry about it, but The European men, the Western men, the American men, they've all been feminized with all this nonsense, this soy and all these estrogens in their tap water, all this nonsense, cultural nonsense, feminism coming from Satanism. The women have been made stupid, and the men have been feminized, and they're allowing their countries all to be destroyed. This is what's coming. Atheism, it's inevitable with atheism. This is what happens. There's no way around it. You have to either, resist the atheism, or this is inevitable. Okay? Atheism says that, Christians have no right to live, and therefore they should be destroyed. Okay? Christianity says all men are equal in the eyes of God, and therefore you should be nice to everybody. Take your pick. There's no other choice. Those are the only choices. If you think there's another choice, then you don't know history. Here's the Russian Christian peasants trading their belongings to try to get some food as they're starving to death. Here are the bread lines in Bolshevik Russia. Okay, I know people that lived under communist regimes, and they said starvation's a real problem, that you're not allowed to be religious, you get in trouble, Christians cannot be promoted, okay? They also said you go to a store, there's nothing in the store. You have to bring cash, and then you have to ask them to go look in the back, see if anything has just come in, okay? It's a disaster. It's a big deal to have toilet paper. You wait in line to get toilet paper. That's how backward Russia is. That's what, the cow and the moon in the East do to an economy. Okay, here's the Russian Christians, waiting in line at the communal canteen, hoping they don't starve to death, freeze to death. And here's a horse. A horse dies, and they rush in the street to cut it up and try to get some food to eat it because they're starving. Here's a family searching through the garbage. 1917, 1919 in Russia. Peasants starving for food. Okay, meanwhile, remember, other than the chaos of World War I, the 1800s were this time of massive, rich wealth in Europe. The Victorian Renaissance, the Catholic Revival, the Belle Epoque, where you have some freedom and you have laissez-faire. That means fair capitalism where everyone has a chance. You get massive productivity, massive wealth is generated by that. Meanwhile, in Russia, people are starving, eating out of garbage cans. Here they are, they're starving. The mother and her child, they're searching through the garbage trying to find some food so they don't starve to death. That's the future of America too, if we continue down this path of all this atheistic Darwinism nonsense. Ayn Rand, her father was a pharmacist. They destroyed his pharmacy shop. She saw a lot of her family and friends be killed, starved to death, and she luckily fled, made it to America. She comes to America, and then she looks at New York. She sees all this massive wealth, these massive skyscrapers. Meanwhile, the peasants are homeless, starving to death in Russia, and here you have massive skyscrapers. The rule was so unfair in Russia. Ann Coulter had joked that the Bolshevik Soviets caused 70 years of bad weather, meaning that they stole all the produce of the farmers. So the farmers did as little work as possible because they knew everything would be stolen from them. Okay, and I knew a bunch of people that lived under communism. They said, you're not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to own anything. So lots of the men, they just become alcoholics because there's nothing for them to do. There's no way to improve your personal station. There's no way to make money. There's no way to prosper or make any progress. So men don't like that, and a lot of them just become alcohol. Ayn Rand wrote a book about essentially what socialism does called Atlas Shrugged, about what a disaster is. It just robs all the people. And then here's a quote from Ayn Rand. She said, "There is no difference between communism and socialism, except in the means of achieving the same ultimate end. Communism proposes to enslave men by force, socialism by the vote. It is merely the difference between murder and suicide. You end up with just third world poverty." Okay, here's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Okay, and he wrote Gulag Archipelago, and he'll tell you the truth. I'll just give you a little bit of his quotes. I made a separate video about him. I don't have time to go into all that, but just a few of his quotes. "Atheism is at the core of the entire Soviet system. Atheism is what makes it possible." He said, "If you ask me why 65 million Christians were killed and 48,000 churches were burned down, I will tell you it is because of atheism." That is the truth. Learn this, because if you don't know this, and if everybody lets atheism continue to take over the USA and the Western world, This is what's coming. It's obvious. There is no other option. This is what is coming. You know, it's so freaking obvious, but people have all brain damage with the fluoride and the aluminum in the water, and then the public school, you know, destruction of their brains. This is like 1 + 1 = 2. It's so obvious. Okay, Solzhenitsyn continues. You must understand the Bolsheviks hated the Christians. They tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of remorse. It cannot be overstated. Bolshevism committed the greatest human slaughter of all kind. If I was asked today to formulate as concisely as possible what was the main cause of this ruinous revolution that swallowed up some 65 million of our people, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men had forgotten God. That is why this had all happened. Men had forgotten God. That is why this has all happened. Men had forgotten God. That is why this had all happened. It's been known since the Old Testament. If the population turns their back on God, he turns his back on them. And you can laugh at religion, but that's exactly what happens. Okay? It says, modern society is hypnotized by socialism. It is prevented by socialism from seeing the mortal danger it is in. And one of the greatest dangers of all is that the people have lost all sense of danger. They cannot see it, even though it's coming towards them, moving swiftly towards them. To destroy a people, you must first sever the roots. That's why they rewrote all the history books and tried to say America's not a Christian country or America's evil and racist. Yeah, right. Why does everybody in the world want to come here? Give me a frickin' break. To do evil, a human must first of all believe that what he is doing is good. Ideology, that is what gives evil its long-sought justification and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. Atheism is the core of the Soviet system. Anyways, I hope you found that helpful.